With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Yud. We left off on Daf Tes, Amid Beis, Mamish at the end of the Amid, at the end of the second to last line. We are reviewing, or we're going to review the four scenarios as Rabbi Yirmiyah comments that in the Mishnah on Daf Tes Amid Beis, the Mishnah teaches us the rule that Ha'oisa Sukkah, right, Al Gabe Sukkah. If there's a sukkah over a sukkah or the sukkah underneath, says the Mishnah's puzzle, the sukkah on top is kosher. And as we began learning by the two dots on Daf Tes Amud Beis, we're speaking about a case where the floor of the top sukkah is kosher schach. So one would have argued, why would there be a problem? If you are in the bottom sukkah, you have a layer of schach over your head, that's kosher. And then there is also what if there is a place for people to go into, and then there's another layer of kosher schach, and it was learned by the fact that it says Basukah is Teshvu, and it's written without vavs. That's going back to the Yesh Aim Lamosoidus. We're focusing on the written word, not on the way it's pronounced. And we learn from that there needs to be a singular sukkah and not a double sukkah, meaning that one may not have two layers of schach, and therefore the bottom sukkah is possible. On that came Rabbi Yirmiyah, and he says, of course, that is the principle, but in actuality, you can have all four cases. You can have a case where both of them are kosher. You can have a case where both of them are puzzle. We left off in case number 3. There can be a case that is exactly the opposite of what the Mishnah writes, where the bottom sukkah is going to be kosher. The top sukkah will be invalid, will be puzzle. And then you have the fourth case, which is the case of the Mishnah, where the top one is kosher, and the tachtoina and the bottom one will be valid, and we have to still speak out the final two cases of Rabbi Yirmiyah. After we're going to finish with that, as we spoke out when we learned in the last year, accepting the principle that one may not have a doubled layered schach. Question is, when do we view the two layers as two separate schachos, two separate layers? And when do we say that it's considered, a very thick schach? In other words, how far apart must the layers be for us to view the bottom sukkah as a sukkah tachas hasukah? And we will see over here a machloikis, and that's going to lead us into the understanding of Shitas Rebbe Yehuda of the Mishnah and Daf Tes Amud Beis on the top, who says that im ein doyorin bo elyono, that if you don't have any tenants on the one in the top, then the bottom one is kosher. We're going to explain what Rabbi Yehuda means and exactly what is the point of contention, what is the argument between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Then we're going to move on to the Mishnah Daf Yud. Now, guys, we're going to start speaking now about the schach, dinim and the schach, because up until now we were really primarily focused on the height, on the maximum height, on the minimum height, on the length and on the width, and many laws about the structure itself. Now we're going to get more into the sukkah. Now let's focus on the schach. What happens if a person spreads a sheet over the schach to afford greater protection from the sun, or under the schach to make sure that if any leaves fall from the schach, they don't fall into your soup? What's going to happen if a person hangs up decorations? And we're going to see that certain things will be considered subordinate to the schach, like sukkah decor, like noye sukkah, and it will not invalidate the sukkah, and other things will not be considered subordinate to the schach, and it's going to be considered as something that's interposing between the person and the schach, or between the schach and the skies, and it will invalidate the sukkah. We're going to have also the concept of shluchei mitzvah are peturim min hasukkah, even though nowadays we go beyond the letter of the law, but just to be aware of that din. And one of the examples that the Mishnah is going to be speaking about will be if you have a tent in the sukkah. So it's not that you're hanging a decorative sheet right under the schach for the core, but you have a tent. Now, it's very common for people to have tents in the sukkah because one has to dwell in the sukkah for the entirety. Dwelling means everything: eating, drinking, sleeping. It was very common in the times of Chazal for beds to have some sort of canopies right above it. I can tell you right now that in Brazil, in many places, millions, mamash, 100 million people, because of the terrible mosquitoes you have over there and the illnesses that some of them bring, it's the most common thing. My father used to make mosquiteros, and that is that every bed would have either 2 posts coming up from it or 4 posts, and there would be various types of sheets spread on top of it, and people would sleep on top of the bed under this tent. Now, will that tent disconnect you from the sukkah or not? That's going to be the final topic of the daf, and we're going to learn that there are many types of tents. You have a tent that was on a 4-post, it was on a 2-post. That's very significant, because if you don't have a tent that has at least 1 tefach, a flat roof, it's considered already a lesser tent. It's less problematic. We're going to be learning also about the height. The height will be of significance. We're going to be learning how the posts upon which the sheet is spread upon, how fixed it is in the beds, how kavua is also going to be of significance. And this sugya will also go already into the next daf, into daf Yud Aleph. We're going to learn various shitos of Tanoim that hold that something that's arai, a tent is arai, b'chlal, cannot take you away from also being in the sukkah. In other words, there's going to be some who hold it's a non-issue to begin with, and even if there is an issue, we're going to learn about many madregas of oihalim. Some of them will be problematic, and some of them will not. And with that, let's start again. Daf Tes Amid Beis, the last word in the second to last line in the Amid. Yes, the Mishnah taught us the din that if a person has one sukkah under the other, the bottom sukkah is automatically invalidated because there's a double layer of schach. Yet, having said that, and we accept that, Rabbi Yirmiyah is painting the 4 scenarios, and we are up to scenario number 3, which is mamish the opposite of what the Mishnah says, and that is that you can have a sukkah under a sukkah. Pa'amim, reading inside the Gemara, the last line, shetachtoina, the bottom one will be kosher, and v'hol yoina, and the top one will be pas. And this one, as the Gemara is going to say explicitly, this is really the biggest chiddush of Rabbi Yirmiyah. And here we go. So Heichi Damim Kigoin explains the Gemara. Shahatachtoina, the bottom sukkah, the schach on the bottom sukkah is great schach. It creates tzilosa meruba mechamas. It creates a greater amount of shade than sunlight, which is exactly what we need. And the elyoina, the schach on the top one, is a sparse amount of schach. It is not enough. Chamasa meruba mitzilosa. It allows more sunlight to go in than as it creates shade. So b'chlal, to begin with, when Rabbi Yirmiyah says that the elyoinas pesula, we're speaking about a case where there isn't enough schach. Now, here is the chap of Rabbi Yirmiyah, and v'kaima tarvayu b'soich esrim. What is of utmost importance is that the schach, even of the top one, is not above 20 amas from the ground of the bottom one. Why is that important? That makes all the difference in the world, because the upper schach, we said, is invalid because it doesn't produce the majority of the shade. And that already will explain why do we say that the lower sukkah is valid, because the lower sukkah is not beneath the sukkah, because the one on the top is invalid. But here's the problem. The problem is like we spoke out yesterday, is that when I have kosher schach under invalid schach, the kosher schach that's directly under the invalid schach, the example we had in the Mishnah was that it was underneath branches, halachically becomes non-existent because it's not under the heavens. So why don't we say, I get it, that it's not sukkah tacha sukkah, because the elyoina doesn't have enough schach, but why doesn't the schach on the top invalidate those branches that are directly underneath it? And that halachically l'chu'ura should make the bottom schach also not sufficient schach to give you more shade than sunlight. So that's the chap of Rabbi Yirmiyah, that since the top schach, since the schach of the top sukkah is not l'mayla me'esrim amma from the ground of the lower one, so you cannot say, even from the perspective of the lower sukkah, that the schach from the top one is invalid schach, which will make the schach underneath it non-existent. You can't say that. It's in the case of the Mishnah, it's gavaldik. Where there was schach under a branch that's connected to a tree, that's bona fide invalid schach. Yes, it halachically says that the schach that's directly underneath it is non-existent. Yes, the top sukkah is not kosher, but it's not kosher not because it doesn't have kosher schach. It's not kosher because there is more sun. There's more sun than shade. Now, if the top schach from the bottom one would be l'mayla me'esrim amma, that would be invalid schach. And that would discount, it would invalidate, it would make non-existent the lower sukkah's schach that's directly under the upper sukkah's schach. That would be a problem. But whenever the top sukkah is not l'mayla me'esrim amma from the ground, so you can't say that it's going to invalidate that which is underneath it. It doesn't invalidate it because it's kosher schach. It's inside the esrim amma. We have a limud that you can't build a sukkah under a sukkah. We're not, because since the top sukkah doesn't have enough shade, the top sukkah is not a sukkah. This is Gavaldik. This is a big chiddush. And now case number 4, 3 lines from the top of the Amin, and that's really the normal case, and that's the case of the Mishnah, that Upa Amin, that Sheho Elyoina Kisheda V'Tachtoina Pesula Heichidami, Pashit, Kigoin, both sukkahs are valid. The Tarvayu, both schachos are providing more shade than sunlight. Silasam Merubah Mechamas. And V'Kaima Elyoina B'Toich Esrim. The Chesem here just means that the schach of the top sukkah is within 20 amas from the ground of the top sukkah. Just make it clear. In other words, every sukkah is a standalone kosher sukkah. And that's why the Elyoina is kosher. And only because of this unique limud that you cannot build a sukkah under a sukkah because you're like sitting in a double sukkah, that's why the Tachtoina is going to be psula. And now that we said that, the Gemara is asking on all of the 4 statements of Rabbi Yirmiyah Pshita, the Gemara didn't find anything novel in anything that was said. And the Gemara's answer will be that the first case that we learned today, that's the Chiddush. The answer is the Gemara. Rabbi Yirmiyah spoke at the 4 cases really to teach you something novel, and that's case number 3, where the Punkt Fakert, where the bottom one is kosher and the Elyoin is psula. And that's a big Chiddush. Because the reason why we did not invalidate the bottom sukkah was only because the schach of the top sukkah is not l'mayla me'esrim amma from the ground of the bottom one. And here one would have thought that we should always invalidate it by making a gzeira. The ma with the tema nigzar dilma mitzvah of schach pasel ba'ad schach kosher. Notes when the schach of the top sukkah. Don't forget it's a double-decker sukkah. There is a chance that when you build any time a sukkah over another sukkah, that the schach from the top one will be above 20 amas from the ground of the bottom one. And in such a case, like we mentioned, that will invalidate the schach of the bottom one, because schach under non-kosher schach becomes halachically non-existent. And in that case, it's like a puzzle. But maybe the Chachamim would always make a gzeira to always invalidate it because of this scenario, Kumash Milan, that we make no such gzeira. And as long as the upper schach is within, it's not above 20 amas from the ground of the bottom one, when the top one is puzzled because Chamasam Meruba Mitzilasam, so we don't have this exclusion of the bottom one because it's not sukkah tacha sukkah. The one on the top is not a real sukkah. The bottom one remains kosher. Givaldik. And now asks the Gemara, we're up Daf Yud 9 lines from the top. Now that we established the rule, you cannot build a sukkah under a sukkah, kama yehi bin sukkah la sukkah, in order for you to apply this limud, v'tehei tachtoina psula. And here we have 3 opinions. Omar Rav Huna, only 1 tefach. Even if there's only 1 tefach space, now guys, that's quite amazing. 1 tefach is very little. But if the bottom layer of schach is in such a way where it's not like branches that they go up and they go down, it's flat. It's like our mats, the ones that are kosher. Not all are kosher, but the ones that are kosher. And then you have a tefach space, completely a vacuum. You put another layer, that's already called sukkah tacha sukkah. Why do we say that? So he brings a great analogy. Shekein motzinu bi ahale tuma tefach. A corpse from a yid, l'kula alma, even the Rashbi limits tumas oil dafke to adam atem kiruyim adam, gives off tumas oil. What's tumas oil? Tumas oil means that if there is the corpse or enough of the corpse under a halachic covering, any other item underneath it, any other item that's susceptible to becoming tamei will become tamei, even though there's no physical contact at all and nothing is being moved. Tumas oil. Now there's something interesting that the oil creates, lekula, and that is like this: if there is a source of tumah and you have a roof, anything above the roof remains tahar. If there is one tefach of space between the roof and the upper surface of the source of the corpse, and the upper surface of the source of tumah. If there is the corpse and it's in a room, but the roof does not give you a tefach of empty, it's within the tefach, then we say that the tumah is called tumah retzutza, and the tumah goes all the way up. And something can be above the roof, it will become tamei if it's directly over the tumah, directly over the corpse, even though there is a roof interposing. That is where he learns the concept of a tefach. Now, there's another detail regarding oil, and that is how large, how wide, how long and wide must the roof be for it to be able to convey tumah to something else underneath it, also a tefach. Because if you have a covering that's not a tefach by tefach, and some of it is over the corpse, the other part is over your cup, it won't convey tumah, and it will never be chaytzitz. It's not called it's non-existent. So that says Rafuna, since regarding tumas oil, we have this rule of a tefach. What is schach? It's gavaldik. It's not stam. Schach is also an oil. So we already have this rule of a tefach. Let's read it inside. And really, it's not a detanya, but it's a detanan, recording a Mishnah from a Halois. Right? Pei Gimel Mishnah Zayin. Tefach, al tefach, how big must a roof be? One tefach long, at least. One tefach wide, at least. And berum tefach, like we said, the height of the roof must be at least one tefach above the surface of the tumah underneath it. Only then will the oil both maybe as a tumah, it will convey tumah to anything else that's susceptible to tumah, that's under that roof, because it's under a halachic roof. One tefach by one tefach as a roof, and being that it has a tefach of space in between, it interposes, it stops the tumah from going to anything that's directly above the roof, above the corpse. Even if the roof has a tefach by tefach, it's a normal roof, it's your house. But if there isn't a tefach of empty space between the corpse and the roof, loy maybe, v'loy chaytzitz. It's not going to convey, even though there's something else underneath it. It's not called a roof, it's non-existent. And on the other hand, the chumrah, it's not going to stop it. So from the laws of tumas oil, we apply the same here by Sukah, that if you even only have one tefach in between the both layers of schach, it's considered a double schach, and the bottom one is going to be possible. Rab Chizda says, and Rabba Barafuna hold, Amri, Arba O. Guys, just remember a klal, that Arba, without the hey, goes to Amos, and whenever it's a Lashon Nekeva, that means there's a hey at the end, Arba O, it refers to Tfachim. Not one tefach, but at least 4 tfachim. Why is that? Because Shalom Etzinu Makim Chashuv, Pachus Ma'arba. And now he's going not to Dinim of Tumah, but he's going to Hilchos Shabbos. And we do not find that if you want to create a Reshus HaYachid or a Carmelis to separate an area from a Reshus HaRabim, right? It has to be at least 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. That was what we learned in the beginning of Masechta Shabbos. And we have a word if there is an area that is sectioned off from the Reshus HaRabim, because it has mechitzas of 10 tfachim or higher, but it doesn't have 4 by 4. It's called a makom ptur. It's called a makom ptur. So what's a makom? 4 by 4. I know by Hilchos Shabbos it's 4 by 4, the length and the width. Here we're speaking about the height. It doesn't matter. So we're borrowing this concept from Shabbos and we are applying it to our din here by Sukah. And opinion number 3, Shmuel Amar Asara. You have to have 10 tfachim in between In between one schach and the other, and my Talmud the Shmuel, what's his rationale? He's not going to Tumah, he's not going to Shabbos, he's sticking to Sukkah itself. And what does Shmuel say? That's his klal, kehechsheda kach pesulam. As is the Sukkah's validation, so is its invalidation. That makes a lot of sense. In other words, explain Shmuel, ma hechsheda, to make one Sukkah kosher, not two Sukkahs. So that's what we learned. One of the rules we learned in the beginning of the Masech is that there is a minimum height. The minimum height is that you have to have in the open space, excluding the schach, 10 tfachim. If it's not 10 tfachim, it's not considered a sukkah. So we apply the same rule. You want to invalidate the sukkah because it's sukkah tacha sukkah? Okay, so then the space of the top one must be a kosher sukkah, which is afsula ba'asara. Very good. And now the Gemara is going to try to refute Shmuel. And we're going to now go and through this understand exactly Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah on the Testament base on top of the Amid. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah Rabbi Yehuda Omer arguing with the Tanakama, if there are no tenants living in the upper sukkah, then he gave a categorical statement. Fragt the Gemara exactly what does Rabbi Yehuda mean? What does it mean there are no tenants? Do you think Rabbi Yehuda is speaking whether there are actual people there or not? That's irrelevant. Doesn't make sense. Guys, let's not forget that we learned yesterday the Braisa. There was a limud. Basukais teishu. The word sukais is written without any vavs, which means that we're going to focus now on the Masaidas. And it means one sukkah, not a double sukkah. Who cares if they're tenants or not? Elot must be elolav, my end the yoidin. What Rabbi Yehuda means to say, guys, the end of the narrow lines, kol she'ena ru'uya ladira, that if the upper sukkah is not fit, it's not fit. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Then the bottom one is good. And vehechidami l'chayda Shmuel is saying shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Vehechidami the legavoy asara. And on that, Rabbi Yehuda says the bottom one is kosher. If that is what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, well, then from that we extrapolate that the Tanakama, that the Chachamim, the Tanakama Sovan, right at the end of the first wide line, afal pisha einu oiladi, that's possible. That's a problem. So says the Gemara, ki yasser Avdimi. When Avdimi came from the Holy Land, he said, and he's not quoting Rabbi Yochanan, which is the majority of cases. He's saying, Amri b'marava b'chal and Eretz Yisrael, that's the way they learn the Mishnah. Im ein tachtoina yechoila lekabel kodem uksasois shel elyoino. It's not about the height. Rabbi Yehuda is not focusing on the height, but someone mentioned this when we were learning the Mishnah. It's more speaking about, it's not that there's a proper floor to the top one. Then, of course, the bottom one is not good because then you don't have kosher schach. It's that the floor of the top sukkah, which is the roof, which is the ceiling of the bottom sukkah, is kosher schach. Now, in many cases, it can be very weak. And that is what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, that if it's not strong enough for you to properly put on it that which people you would put on the floor prior to sitting on it, which is pillows, etc., then the bottom one is going to be kosher. And why is that? So like Rashi says, Gavaldik Chavre, 10 lines under the Gemara. Why? I'll tell you why. Because Rabbi Yehuda is basing his shita on that which we just heard, the words from Shmuel, that decheshera kach pesula, that as is its validation, so is its invalidation. Meaning that if the top one is invalid, because Pashat, you're going to fall through the ground. You can't be there. So, not valid, you can't eat in there. So if it's not valid, how can it invalidate the bottom one? It won't. But guys, understand, if Rabbi Yehuda's sheet is based on the klal of kehechshera kach pesula, what does that mean? That the Chachamim argue with this principle. So I know that even if he's not focusing on the height, it's about lakabel kadam u'kusasois, but it's based on the principle of what we call the principle of Shmuel. So if Rabbi Yehuda is the one that subscribes to Shmuel, is a haraya that the Chachamim argue with that. So how can Shmuel use that lishita as Tanakama? Mechlal frek the Gemara the Tanakama Sovan that afal pisha einu oil lakabel Nevertheless, it's a sukkah, tacha sukkah, and it's puzzle. Well, if that's the case, if the Tanakh does not subscribe to the rule of kachsher kach pasula, so what would be the logic for the Shmuel to learn pshat in the Tanakh that if it's not 10 tvachim tall, then the bottom one is going to be kosher? Why? Because kachsher kach pasula, but the Tanakh does not subscribe to it. So the Gemara therefore says, no. Really, the Tanakh agrees that the upper sukkah can only invalidate the bottom sukkah if the upper sukkah is kosher. Everyone holds kehechsher kach psula, which is why the Tanakh will hold that if the upper sukkah is not 10 tvachim tall, the bottom one is kosher. Now, the machlokes in the Mishnah is not about the height; it's about when the floor is not strong enough for people to live in there. You're gonna put a couple of chairs today and tables, and people are gonna sit in it. That's gonna crash through. It's not gonna stay up. So hold on. So and Rabbi Yehuda therefore says the bottom one is kosher, and the Tanakh says says it's puzzle. Why puzzle? So says the Gemara, the case of the machlokes here where it's strong, but borderline strong. The Yechola lekabel al yedei hatchak, with difficulty, with a lot of precaution. You can't enter the top sukkah. You weigh too much. That will be the case where there is a machlokes. Now, guys, let's go back to the first Mishnah and understand that this machlokes and that machlokes is the same. If you remember when we learned the first Mishnah, and we had on Daf Beis Amadal of 3 ways of understanding the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, we're going to focus on Shitas Rava. And Rava says the question is whether you need to have a fixed permanent structure, which is Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, for the sukkah to be a good sukkah, and Rabbi Yehuda wants for a sukkah to be of a more permanent nature. And the reason why the Chachamim said, Lid Rava, that a schach above 20 amos is not kosher, because the very fact that you needed to build walls that go to 20 amos, it makes the walls be very strong, and we dafka don't want for a sukkah to be more permanent. We want it to be aray. Now this fits exactly to our machlokes. If you have the floor of the top sukkah, which is the schach for the bottom sukkah, and can people live there? Is it strong enough? Alidei atchak. Rabbi Yehuda l'shitasai, he holds he doesn't want the sukkah to be alidei atchak. He wants it to be of more permanent nature. So that really, Rabbi Yehuda invalidates the top one. If the one on top is not valid, it cannot invalidate the one underneath it. That's why Rabbi Yehuda says that the Chachamim l'shitasam that are dafka not looking for a sukkah that's more permanent. They prefer for the sukkah to be more of a temporary nature. So for them, the fact that the floor is not strong to hold every person, you have to be cautious. Someone that weighs too much or too many people will be a problem. The Chachamim hold it's not a problem. Which lechachamim l'tanakama, therefore the top sukkah is kosher. The moment the top sukkah is kosher, that's why the chachamim hold the bottom sukkah is not, because of the limud that you can't have a sukkah that's made tachas a sukkah. Perfect. Next Mishnah. Says the Mishnah like this: you built yourself a sukkah, has all the right dimensions, you have the right amount of schach, but peiras or peides oleh sadin, you spread over the schach a sheet. A sheet is a beged. A beged is something that's susceptible to tumah. A sheet is something that's not valid for schach. It doesn't grow from the ground directly. A sheet is not good. What happens if you spread a sheet on top of the schach, mipnei achama, because you want for the sheet to provide shade? That's a problem, because schach is for shade. Now you are also spreading a sheet for shade, or you spread a sheet right under the schach, because of the falling leaves. That means that even today, when we still get the beautiful real schach, you get cut off branches from trees. So there's, you can have leaves that are going to fall into your food. So you want to have something to hold it. Okay. So on these two cases, as we'll see in a moment, the sukkah is puzzle, but the reason why the
sardine is going to be is on top or under?
Both. In either case, if the purpose for you putting the sardine and the purpose, your intent is of tremendous significance, is for protection, either to protect from the sun or to protect the people underneath it from the falling leaves. Or now we're going to learn about another scenario that is also invalid for a different reason. Kinoif, my friend, is a type of bed that has 4 posts, each one on a different end of the bed. And like we mentioned in the introduction, and it was common for people to spread over a sheet, and they would sleep, so to say, in that protection. But that is not because the sheet is here to provide shade, but that will classify the bed as a tent. So now you have a tent in the sukkah. A different issue. The schach is fine, but you're not in the sukkah. You are in a tent in the sukkah. So in all of these cases, says the Mishnah, psula. And Ashi clearly speaks out that the psulan for the first 2 cases is different, like we mentioned. First 2 cases is because we're going to classify the sheet as schach. Why? Schach means something that's placed to provide shade and protection. Okay? So it was placed to provide shade and protection, and it's pasal schach. It's mekabel tuma. In the third case, like Rashi says over here, it's not about that it's not called schach. You didn't put it to provide shade, but it's called an oil. And now oil, according to our Mishnah, creates a hefsek, creates a interposition between the person and the sukkah. You have to sleep in the sukkah. You're not sleeping in the sukkah. You're sleeping in the tent. The tent is in the sukkah. The oil is mafsik between you and the sukkah. Avol, however, regarding the third scenario, we're not viewing the sheet as a schach because it's not there to provide shade. It's to create a tent. It's to create this bed. Avol, so when do we consider this a proper oil? If there is 4 posts, which means that there is a flat roof. That's an oil. Avol, when you have this other type of bed where they would have, it's called naklitin. Naklitin is where there's only 2 sticks going up from the bed. And when you put the sheet over it, it goes all the way top. There's an apex. There isn't a flat roof. It goes slanted. So therefore, we consider this a lesser oil, a non-halachic oil. And you are allowed to sleep in it, and you are sleeping in the sukkah because you're not in a halachic oil. Why? Because there isn't a tefach, flat roof, and a lot more. Very good. That's the picture of the last case in the Gemara. Okay, so let's begin focusing on the first 2 cases of the Mishnah before we get into the oil issue. As we mentioned, if a person spreads a sheet to either over the schach or under the schach, but they're both equal for some sort of shade and shelter, shade from the sun, shelter from the leaves, it's invalid. Now, what the Mishnah did not mention is another possibility, which we will be medayik from the Mishnah. We'll extrapolate it from the Mishnah. The Mishnah gave a reason. Why shano that it's invalid? If you're putting a sheet under the schach because you want to stop the falling leaves from falling into your food or from falling on the person. So it's called a schach because it's to shelter you from that which is over it. But if you want to make noye sukkah, you want to give decorations to your sukkah, and you're not putting it on your walls, which is of course okay. You're putting it under the whole schach. There's a sheet. You have a beautiful sheet. You have a Persian rug. Says Rab Chizda, the ganze sukkah is kosher. Wow. Because anything that's put to beautify the sukkah becomes halachically subordinate to the sukkah. And it doesn't take away the fact that you are under the schach. Says the Gemara Pshita, why do I even need Rab Chizda? Clear. Mipnei Hanashortanan, the Mishnah spoke about why you put the sheet. The Mishnah is telling you that it's your intent of designation is of significance. So the Gemara answers, it's also going to be invalid. And because that's just the more common case, that's why Rab Chizda wants to make it clear that noye sukkah do not interpose between you and the sukkah. Now, let's now actually try to bring a raya to Rab Chizda. It says in a braisa, the schach is done properly. And now you decorated the sukkah. by putting karamim, colored clothes, or putting sadinim, hamitsuyadim, embroidered linens, or v'talaba, or you are hanging from the schach and it's hanging under the schach. Egoism, not shkedim, almonds, afarsikin, peaches, limoinim, pomegranates, parchile, anovim, clusters of grapes, va'atari shal shubayim, wreaths of grain, glass containers, Rashi says, of wine, because that's considered beautiful. It was something of fancy then. It was a big chiddush. Glass containers of oils, glass containers of fine flour. So first of all, says the Braisa, as we spoke on already just recently, even if the sukkah falls apart during sukkahs, since at the entry, bein hashmashos of sukkahs, they were designated to be the core of the sukkah, subordinate to the sukkah. So now they become muksa for the mitzvah during the 7 days of Sukkot. Says the Mishnah, says the Braisa, asurli stapik mahem, you may not use of any of these items that you hung, dafyuram and beis. Let's go move, it's a little bit late. Until when is it considered rabbinically muktzah, even if the sukkah collapsed, ad mutzoy achron shel chag. And here the Mishnah, the Braisa says, v'im hisna leim, if while you hung the decor, you clearly verbally stipulated that what Rashi says, that I am not hanging these items exclusively for Noye Sukkah. I'm not only doing it for the core. I would like to use it. If I'll run out of wine, here I got myself wine already. If you said that, then no problem. Then it's not considered muktzah only for the mitzvah, and then they don't become muktzah. Hakoy lefi tanoi. Now, what do we see from over here? Now, you can argue that the Braisa didn't speak about how much space did it occupy in the ceiling, but the Braisa Taka said it categorically. So even if we're speaking about also once you hang out sheets and linens, no, they're big. They cover the whole ceiling. You're creating a new ceiling, and there's a non-issue. So l'chayda, that's a raya. It's Taka not an issue. Says the Gemara, it's not a raya. Rabbi Chizda is right, but that's not a proof, because maybe what the Braisa was speaking about, dilma min hatzad, that you were hanging it on the walls. Maybe if you would hang it from the top, maybe it would invalidate it. Says the Gemara, Itmer was stated, Noye Sukkah, the core of the Sukkah, Ein mematin besukkah, it does not diminish, does not reduce the height. Now guys, height reduction and saying that it does not reduce the height is equally a chumrah and equally a kula. How is it equal? Like if the schach is lamayla me'esrim amon, so the sukkah right now is invalid, and you hung noye sukkah, and the noye sukkah goes inside the right shiur, it does not reduce it, it remains invalid. On the other hand, if your sukkah has the minimum height of 10 tfachim and then the schach, but the noye sukkah is hanging down lamata masara tfachim, it will not invalidate it. It's a kul and a chumrah. It's not a problem. It doesn't reduce the height of the sukkah. Amar Ravashi, however, he's not arguing. He's saying, Omin Hatzad, if you have a sukkah that has the minimum length and width, when we paskin kishitas beis Shammai, 7 by 7 tfachim, roishoy v'rubai v'shulchana, you have exactly 7 by 7. You're living in a pop-up sukkah, and you're putting these thick noye sukkah on the sides, and now you are reducing the width. Yes, that's called a reduction. And that's connected to what we learned in the beginning of a dira serucha. There's a certain amount of unpleasantness. So interestingly, reduction, no. To begin with, 10 tfachim is not that much space, but it makes it less unpleasant. If it's from the sides, it makes it more unpleasant. Rav Ashi says that will invalidate the sukkah. Story. Minyamin, the story is about something that we didn't speak about. It's gavaldik. Minyamin, who was the servant of the great Rav Ashi. It mishalei ketointa b'maya, his shirt, his jalaba, for whatever reason, got soaked in water. He wanted to hang it up to dry. And what did he do? Ba'ashtatcha ametalalta. He spread it over the schach. Now, guys, appreciate something. What did we learn until now? We learned like a schach that's put for protection from the sun or from the leaves invalidates the schach. A new sadin, a new covering. A covering that's put to beautify the sukkah does not invalidate the sukkah. Here in this story, it's not this nor that. It's a new category. He didn't put it for protection. He didn't put it to beautify. It's not about the sukkah. It's about the item itself. He wants for that kotoines to dry. So will it invalidate the sukkah or not? So what happened? Amalei Ravashi to his servant, Aliyah, remove it, take it away. Why? The loy lemru, for people not to think that again, it's a beged. The beged is like a sadin. It's makabel tuma. It's invalid. People should not say that there's a sukkah that has chach of something that's makabel tuma. Says the Gemara, Ravashi didn't say that it's inherently a problem. It's like a mata sign. People should not say. Well, if it's about people should not say, why would people say? People will see that it's wet. People will see that it was hung for it to dry. Maybe that's what Minyamin told Ravashi, or that's what the Gemara is saying. And indeed clarifies the Gemara that Ravashi said only l'chiyavsha kamin olach. Now there's like always, there's different ways of understanding the Gemara. We're going to follow that this is not a problem. It's not a problem. All Ravashi told him is that after the garment fully dries, not to create a matasayin, you have to remove it. But as long as people can see that it's wet and people will understand that it was hung to dry out, as long as it wasn't put to create shade, it does not invalidate the schach. Weiter, Itmar, we learned, even though we just said that the core of the sukkah, even hanging it from the ceiling, since it's for the sukkah, it doesn't invalidate the schach, but there's a limit to that. Noye sukkah. What happens is hamuflagen mimenu, again arbaha with a hey. Remember klal arba amas arba tfachim. If you hung it low, that there's 4 tefach between the bottom of the schach and your noy sukkah. So here there's a machlokes. Rav Nachman says, I don't care. I don't care that it's not close to the schach. The concept, it's subordinate to the schach, and the sukkah remains kosher. However, both Rav Chizda and Rabba Barafuna, they both hold that psula, because now it, so to say, becomes independent. It's too far off the sukkah, and it creates a chatzitz. You're not under the sukkah. You're under a tent. Says the Gemara story.
Rabbi, would Rav Chisda agree that it's mutter if it's for noi?
Yeah, for sure. All he's saying is that when you make it l'noi, it has to be physically close to the schach. If it's too far away from the schach, even though your intent was for beauty, but halachically it's already considered something independent of the schach. Now, just to know the history, Rav Nachman, we know his wife was Yalta. The Gemara speaks about her. Rav Nachman was the son-in-law from the Reish Galusa, from the head of the Jewish government in Babylonia. He was very wealthy, and many people would come a lot to the Reish Galusa. They would interact with Rav Nachman, but Rav Nachman at many times was the overseer of the Jewish government in Babylonia. So here there was this machlokes. This is such a gavaldic story. And one time, these two Amoraim that argued with Rav Nachman, and by the way, we paskin like them, and they hold that the noye sukkah, that's if it's 4 tfachim or lower under the schach, it's puzzle. They once went, Rav Chizda v'Rabba Barafuna, iklou lebei Reish Galusa. They went to visit the Reish Galusa, and they went there for sukkahs, and Rav Nachman gave them accommodations. Rav Nachman on behalf of the Reish Galusa. But what type of sukkah did he give them? Is Agninu Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman gave them a sukkah. He knew that. He gave them a sukkah that the noye sukkah was hung. It was hung under 4 tfachim. There was a 4 tfachim hefsek, and he wanted to see what they will say. Here you're being offered a home to sleep. These fruma tenants, and they start making you mashing. He wanted to see how they will react, and ishtiku. They were quiet. Even though Rav Nachman knew that they held its puzzle. So Amar Lahu, Rav Nachman, they're quiet. He was looking for a nice discussion. He asked them, did the sages disagree? Did you retract your opinion? Do you now agree with me? So Amrulay, so they tell Rav Nachman, no. We're not making a fuss because of a whole different rule. Anan shluchei mitzvah anan. We are on a shlichus of mitzvah. What was the shlichus of mitzvah, guys? The Reish Galusa is included in the mitzvah that a person should be makabel, penei rabbi, the shechina, In here, Rashi writes, Pen Rosh HaGoyla on every Yontif. Until now, Hasidim go to the Rebbe on the 3 Regalim, at least. Why? Because there's a mitzvah. So they consider their journey to the Beit Reish Galusa as a mitzvah. So therefore, they are to begin with exempt from the Sukkah. Many learned why are they exempt because of the klal that ha'oisik b'mitzvah, but paturim in a mitzvah. We'll speak about it another time in greater length. So they says, why should we bring up our old discussion when it's irrelevant? So again, that's it. Says the Gemara. Now we're starting a new topic, and now we're going to start focusing on the third case of the Mishnah, not about the issue of did you spread the sheet either for shelter, did you spread the sheet lenoi, did you spread the sheet, the Gemara added for the sheet itself to dry it. Now we're moving into this whole new topic. If you create a tent in the sukkah, now by the way, this includes so many things as we'll see in the subsequent sugyas. B'chlal, can you sleep under a bed in the sukkah? Same concept. In other words, you're not sleeping directly under the schach. If we're going to subscribe to the concept that an oil is chashuv enough for you to say that if you are in the oil, even though the oil is in the sukkah, you're not in the sukkah, you're in the oil, which is the sheet of our Mishnah, when is it called an oil? So our Mishnah seemingly gave a very simple rule. If there are 4 posts, which means that the roof of the oil, of the tent, has at least a tefach, it's a flat roof, that's an oil, then it's problematic. That was the Mishnah. If it's a type of bread where there was only 2 posts, not klitin, so when you spread out the sheet, there was an apex all the way to the top, there wasn't a flat tefach or more, the Mishnah holds that's not enough of an oil. Now let's go into practical application of it, not for us practical, but practical for the times of Chazal. Basically, as you'll see, people slept always in such beds, and there were certain words, certain names for different types of tented beds. So let's begin. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, version number 1, Muter Lishoin Bikila Besukkah. A kila, as we will see, is a certain type of canopy. We'll see exactly what it is. The kila is okay. Now, Shmuel said a huge chiddush, because again, when you learn in the Mishnah, it seems like the only thing we're looking for is, does it have a flat roof or not? Flat roof, problem. No flat roof, no problem. Says Shmuel, not so quick, not so pashit. Even though the kila type of canopy did have 4 posts, it did create a tefach or more of a flat roof. Why? When? Because it also has to do with the height. It has to do with the height. Now Rashi says Gavoya Asara from the bed, not from the floor. That's another big discussion. There appears to be a contradiction in Rashi. Many people understand that here we're speaking about the posts upon which you are hanging the sadin, which is creating the kila. The posts don't go to the floor. The posts are coming from the top of the bed. So if the bottom of the post is from the mita, then you only count from the mita. Maybe if the post is going all the way to the floor, you would count from the floor, and let's leave it at that. So let's not focus from where are you counting the 10 tefachim. But Shmuel was machadeh, something that's not spoken about in the Mishnah. That if it's lamata masara tefachim, that in itself makes it a lesser oil. And again, the only issue is that you have to sleep in the sukkah. You're in an oil. It's not called an oil. So we discount it, so you are in the sukkah. Okay, now we're going to try to refute this shita of Shmuel. Tashema, Kasha, it says in a Braisa, that Hayoshin Bikila Besuk, it says clearly, Lo Yotzi Yedei Chavasei. And Kila was just this normal type of 4-posted canopy. Kila canopy. So the Gemara answers no. The Braisa is speaking about Kishigavoya Asara. That there is a height. If there's a height of 10 and there's a flat roof, then it's a problem. Shmuel is dafka speaking about a lower kilo. Another attempted refutation against Shmuel. Meisvei, it says in the Mishnah, Hayoshen tachas hamita basukah. We're going to learn about the soon daf chaf. Says the Mishnah, Lo yotzi yedei chavasai. We'll see it's a machlekes tanoim, but this shita. And hold on. Now, why? So before Shmuel, we know why. Because a bed is flat. When you learn the Mishnah, if it's a flat roof, it's called an oil. But now that Shmuel said, no, not so quick. And if something is, if there isn't a height of 10 tefachim, it's not called an oil. L'chayra, under the bed doesn't have 10 tefachim. So the Gemara says Shmuel understands that Mishnah, Hatir Gama Shmuel, that the Mishnah is dafka speaking about a bed that you have 10 tefachim. Because when you are underneath the bed, there's 10 tefachim of open space. And if not, it would be okay according to everyone. Another attempted question, Tashema, from our Mishnah, says, Oishe Peiras, Al Gabi Kinoifois. Guys, remember, that's in our Mishnah. Kinoifois is the 4-poster bed, right? The Naklitin, Naklite is the 2-poster bed. Oishe Peiras Al Gabi Kinoifois, Psulam. Why should it be puzzle? Who cares that it has a flat roof? Answers the Gemara, I'll tell you why. Hassan Nami, because it's 10 tefachim tall. That's not going to work. Says the Gemara, no, nisht. It explicitly does not say so in the Braisa that elaborates on our Mishnah. The Tanya we learned in the Braisa, Naklitin means shnayim. It's a bed that has 2 posts. Kinoifois is a bed that has 4 posts. Then the Braisa continues. Peres al gaba kinoifois, 4 posts, psulam. If you spread the sheet al gaba naklitin ksheira, now the Braisa adds ubilvad. When do we say that the naklitin are okay? Shelo yehi naklitin gevayim and amita asora. Only if the naklitin is not 10 tefachim tall. Wow. Now we got a problem. In other words, if it's 10 tefachim tall, none of it is good. So when this is all the Braisa elaborating the Mishnah. So when do we differentiate between 4 and 2? When it's under Asara, Nichlal de Kinoifois, which is a 4-post bed, Afal Pisha Ein Gavay Asara, is going to be a puzzle. That L'chayra goes clearly against Shmuel. So here the Gemara says like this. When it comes to Kinoifois, I agree that no matter how short it is, it's always going to be puzzle. You know why? Because the KVE, because the posts are securely affixed to the bed. Here, a sheet will consist an oil tent, independent of how low it is. Shmuel was dafka speaking about a kilo. Since the kilo to begin with is not fixed, even though that was a chiddush, even though it's 4, it creates a flat roof. However, if it's lamata ma'asara, it will be kosher. Going back to the beginning of our shiur, the last daf, the kaviyeh, sukkah's mamash fixed. What did we learn today? The 3-way machlokes. What was Shmuel's shita? Yet v'amar Shmuel, the klal of kehech sheira kach psula, as is its validation, so is its invalidation. And what did we say? That if the top sukkah is 10 tefachim, then it's going to be pasul, the one underneath it. But Shmuel holds if the top sukkah is not 10 tefachim tall, then it will not invalidate the one underneath it. Now I got a problem. Now that we are saying that if something is kavua, lishmuel, it's flat roofed, it's considered chashuv. So why wouldn't the top sukkah invalidate the bottom one, even if it's not 10 tefachim tall? Says Shmuel, that's not a problem at all. You're confusing 2 different dinim. Amri, they answered for Shmuel, over there, when you live in a bottom sukkah, you're not in an oil. There is a unique din. You can't have a sukkah under a sukkah. So Shmuel is right by saying, how do you define under a sukkah? A kasher sukkah. Dila mifsal sukkah, if the invalidation is because it's tachas sukkah, so then Shmuel is right by saying a sukkah is only if it's 10 tvachim. If it's not 10 tvachim full, it's not called a sukkah. So this unique invalidation is not shaykh. But over here, you sleeping in this bed type of canopy, the issue is not about a sukkah, it's about an oil. We're going by the shita that an oil is chashuv enough for you to be separated from the sukkah, even though the oil is in the sukkah. Over here, the lishavuyay ahala. So Shmuel is right by saying that if it's batzer ma'asaram, if something fixed, even if the height is less than 10, which is the case of the Mishnah of the kinoifos, then it's considered an oil. But it's not the psul of tachas sukkah, it's a psul of living in an oil. We have another few minutes, and let's go weiter. So Atkan, the first version, I'm saying the first version is because on Daf Yud Aleph, we're going to learn another version of what Shmuel said, and they don't contradict each other. They actually really complement each other. But that's the first statement we have in the name of Shmuel. And now says the Gemara, Amar Aftachlifa Baravimi, in the name of Shmuel, connected. Hayoshein bikila arum. If a person is ungarbed, the person is naked, and they are sleeping in a kila. Moitzi roishay chutz lekila. All they need to do is to extend their head outside the kila, and they get to read the Shema. Now, what's the point? What are we talking about? So Rashi, 5 lines before the bottom of the Amud, explains the following. A couple of rules. Rule number 1. A person is not allowed to recite the Shema in the same area, in the same environment of a exposed erva, including one's own nakedness. Rule number 2, this is very important. A person is legally always considered to be only in one place at any given time. If there are 2 areas and you're laying down, part of your body is in one area, the other part of your body is in an unknown area. You know what we say halachically? We can't say that you are in 2 areas at the same time. We're going to want to know where is the majority of your body, and the minority of the body will be considered as if it is in that same area. Now put these 2 rules together. I'm not allowed to say Shema in an area where there is an exposed erva, my erva. Now, if I'm wearing just clothing, it's not an area. It's not about an area. We're dressed, we can say the Shema. Our erva is covered. But if we're not wearing clothing, if we were to view this kilot canopy as a area, as an oil, if a person is 90% in the oil, your body is in that oil, your head is outside the oil. So physically, you can't even see your erva. It would be a problem. What would be the problem? That your body is in the oil, your head is in, let's say, the house. We say again that a person halachically is only in one area at one given time, and we go after the roiv. So we would put the head halachically in the area of the body. That means it's as if your head is in the oil, and you are now in an area where there is an exposed erva. That the kila is called an area. The kila is called a tent. So what we're quoting in the name of Shmuel is that we don't view the kila as an area, as an oil. It's just a sheet. It's like you're wearing your beged. So that's why, if my head is not inside my shirt, I'm allowed to read the Shema. So what Shmuel is really telling you is that this kila is not considered an oil. Now, what's the issue? So now, Toshim Meisvei, we're going to challenge Shmuel. How can you say a din that's predicated on you viewing the kila as a non-oil? Hayoshin b'kila arum. It says in the Braisa against what you said. We do view the kila as an oil. And once we view it as an oil area, then we go after the rave of the body. So the Gemara gives the same answer we had above. In other words, Shmuel, is a kila an oil or not? Well, you can argue there are 4 posts. It has a flat roof. But we also said that it's not as strong as kinoifos, and it has to do with the height. So that's the word. So when it's 10 tfachim tall or more, even Shmuel is moed, it's an oil. And by the way, it goes together. You can't sleep in it in the sukkah. It's called an oil. If it's an oil area, then you can't read the Shema because the majority of your body is in that area. So is your head. If it's under 10 tfachim, even though they're 4, which means it's a flat roof, it's not considered an oil. It's not like a covering on your body. So it's gavaldik. You can read the Shema and you can sleep in the sukkah. And that this Braisa is speaking dafka about a kila that's 10 tfachim tall, because since it says in the Sefer of that Braisa, if a person is in the house naked, you can't stick your head out of the window and read the Shema. Clear. The same concept, because the house is an environment, it's an area. And even though your head is out of the window, this rule that we're saying is that halachically your body can only be in one area at one given time. And if some is here, some is there, you go after Roiv. So clearly, if we are giving an example of a house, it's a kila like a house, which means it's 10 tefachim tall, shmami no. But again, if it's not 10 tefachim tall, sa'at kan, the sheet of Shmuel, to be continued in the next year, to be continued. Let's go on Daf Yudalef just to read one more line. Ubayis nami. However, if you have a house to begin with is more fixed than a kilo tent, even if the house is not 10 tefachim tall, just like we said, even according to Shmuel, that kinoifois is considered an oil, even if it's not 10 tefachim, then avada by a house. Even the kivi, it's considered halachically an oil, because it's not worse than kinoifais. And if you are in such a house, sticking your head out of the window is not a solution. You may not read the Shema because you are saying it in a halachically area where your erva is exposed. Chevra, to be continued. Great.
Excuse me. What's kilas chatanim?
We'll get to the Daf Yud Aleph. We'll get to right now. We'll get to it right now, Yakir. You went one step ahead. Wow, guys, this daf now is going to be very important. All right, here we go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah, Daf, Yud, Aleph. We left off on Daf, Yud, Aleph, Amud, Aleph, second line from the top of the Amud. We're going to begin by quoting another version of what Shmuel said. Shmuel made a comment concerning the third din in the Mishnah, Daf, Yud, speaking about someone who practically would be sleeping in the type of beds that were very common in the times of Chazal, which is there isn't just a bed that you lay on, that there was some sort of canopy that was built around and above the bed. The issue might be that if we view the canopy as the canopy as an oil, as a tent, many Tanoim subscribe that it's the oil removes you from the sukkah, even though you are in the sukkah. So we're going to have another version just to extend and to clarify more about a oil in the sukkah. We will now quote on Daf Yud Aleph the sheet of the Tana Rebbe Yehuda that Bechlal has no issue with all of this. Rabbi Yehuda holds that loy osi oil arai umevatel oil kva. The fact that an oil is considered temporary biyachas a sukkah. And again, going back to the first Mishnah Daf Beis Amud Aleph, according to Rava's understanding, that Rabbi Yehuda allows for the schach to be l'mayla me'esrim amma, because Rabbi Yehuda does view a sukkah as something more fixed. Make thick walls, adarabba. The more fixed, the better. He says that something that's temporary is completely insignificant in the presence of something that is affixed. So, Bechlal, there's no issue in living in an oil. And then we're going to go to the Mishnah Daf Yud Aleph that's going to teach us explicitly the three big rules concerning schach. And that's something, Baruch, that you asked right there. It was Friday. So we're going to learn the three rules. And once we're going to learn the three rules, we're going to from there go into Chevra, new for the first time, the concept, the halacha, the klal, the rule of tasev v'loy min ha'asui. A sukkah must be valid at the time it's constructed. If when you constructed the sukkah, be'ikar schach, then it was not kosher, then the fix won't always be simple. Many times you're going to have to fix and then replace the schach, lifting it up and putting it back down. Because it has to, again, the word tasav also means that the sukkah, meaning the schach, must be valid when you're making it. Now, the big question will be, one of the three halachas of the Mishnah is that schach that's attached to the ground is not valid. What happens if you spread the schach while it's still attached to the ground? Not kosher. And then you cut the schach. If the act of cutting is called an act of constructing, then you're good, because you validated it while you constructed it. But if we view the act of cutting it, that's not called placing it. That's not called making it. Then that's the case of tasav v'loimin ha'asui. And that's really, as we'll see, that will be a machlokes Rav and Shmuel, whether an act of cutting or an act of detaching is called making or not. And mamish, like we have a machlokes by Sukah, exactly the same we'll have by tzitzis, as we'll give the examples. That if when you tie the fringes to any one of the four corners or to all four corners, at that time it was not valid. And what you needed to do to validate it is to snip the tips, as we'll give examples. But once you snip the tips and you made it into four, which became eight fringes, eight threads on each side, it's already twisted and knotted. Tasav v'loimin ha'asui or not tasav v'loimin ha'asui? Is it enough just to do that act of snipping or of cutting? Or will you have to unravel it and rewind it, retwine it? Same machlokes. And as we will see over here, that we will paskin like Shmuel, that in both cases, it's going to be a problem. That's going to be where we apply the rule of tasa v'loimin ha'asui. It's going to lead us into a third case, which might or might not be connected, and that is back to Sukkahs, and that is the mitzvah of the Daled Minim. Now, we're going to have later that when we take today the four species, three of them are bound together. The lulav and the hadas and the rov are bound together. What's going to happen if you have a hadas that has too many berries on it? We'll speak it out. And it could be fixed by removing the berries. What happens if you remove the berries after they were bound together? Is this going to be similar to the issue of tasav v'loimin ha'asui or not? And finally, on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, this is the big machlokes Tanoim, as to we spoke already. Laman yedu doiroi sechem ki basukoi soy shafti es bnei Yisrael. What does that mean? Ki basukoi soy shafti. Machlokes Tanoim, is the sukkah to remind us that we lived in God's clouds of glory? That's the basukais that we dwelled in when we left Egypt? Or it means no, that when we left Mitzrayim, we Pashat lived in booths. We lived in very flimsy homes. Machlokes Tanoim. If we'll have time, we'll already go into Rabbi Yochanan, the famous Rabbi Yochanan that considers, at least initially we understood that he considers animals gedulei karka. Wow. And according to that, one would be allowed to take the hide of animals and to use it for a schach, but that shita, that version, that statement will be proven was not said by Rabbi Yochanan, because it can be, and Chevra, much, much more. Let us start on Daf Yud Aleph, towards the end of the second line from the top of the Amid, coming back to the dinam of an oil in a sukkah. On Daf Yud, we had one statement of Shmuel regarding the kinoif, regarding the kila canopy, that he said that if a kila canopy, even though it has four posts, if it's not 10 tfachim, if it's under 10 tfachim, it's not called an oil. And now we're going to learn lishnachrina amrila. There's another version, as what did Shmuel say? It's not a contradiction. Actually, this will complement that, but Shmuel did not say, what did he say? Amar Rav Yehuda Shmuel. There's something called a bridal canopy. Now, what's a bridal canopy? Rashi, our teacher, look inside the guys, the third line, the fourth line from the top of the Amud. Kilos chasanim zok Rashi. Eino kishar kilo. It's not like the kilo we learned in the last daf. Ve'ein oisen lo gag. Kilo mean four posters, which means there's a flat roof. Akilas chasanim did not have a roof. V'hi sviva is hamita, v'gago mishupa. So it's more similar to the Daf Yud Mishnah's naklitin. What Shmuel said is that you are allowed to sleep in akilas chasanim. Let's go back inside the Gemara. And he said explicitly, why is that? Lefi she'ein lo gag. Ein lo gag means it doesn't have a roof with the flat tefach. But here, so okay, why do I need Shmuel? The Mishnah said that. The Mishnah said, the Mishnah made a contrast between kinoifos and naklitim. The Mishnah says that you can spread a sheet on naklitim. Here is Shmuel's chiddush. Afal pi shegevoya asara. Here, even if it's 10 tefachim tall, now we did learn in the last daf, in the last year, that height does affect the categorization of permanent or temporary. the taller, the more kavua it is. The more kavua, the more potential, at least, the more problematic it is. So that's what Shmuel wanted to point out, that kilas chasanim is to begin with considered something so insignificant. I don't care if it's 10 tefachim taller or taller. And here again, we challenge Shmuel, Meisvei, starting with the Braisa. Kashan Shmuel says in the Braisa, Hayoshen bikila besukah, loy yotza yidei chavasai. Now, if you're telling me that something that's considered to begin with something flimsy, even if it's 10 tefachim tall, it's not a problem. So then what's the problem with a kila? Answers Shmuel, no. That's what we learned in the last year. Kila does have 4 posts. The roof is flat. The problem with the kila is there is a gag. Kilas chasanim does not have a gag. That's another point we have to look at. Another challenge. Toshema, it says in the Braisa, again, we quoted that in the last year. The meaning of naklitin is a type of canopy that is based on shnayim, on 2 posts, which means there's no gag. Kinoifos that we learned about in the Mishnah is a type of canopy that arba'ah, it has 4 posts. And the Braisa further says, Peidas al gabi kinoifos, any type of sheet that's placed on this kinoifos, so the area beneath it becomes psula. Al gabi naklitin, the area underneath it becomes ksheda. Here the Braisa writes, befeidish ubelvat shelo yiu naklitin gvayim min hamita asara tfachim. Clearly, even if there isn't a flat roof, if it's 10 tefachim, it is a problem. Frek Gemara, fears is the kasha. Very similar to what we had in the last year. Answer Shmuel. There are many levels. There are many different types of canopies, and it's not is it 10 or not 10. It's not is it flat or not flat. You have to put all these components together. Shan and naklitin, relative to kilas chasanim, naklitim is more permanent. And therefore, if it's 10 tefachim, it's a problem. Kilas chasanim was considered the least kavua. If you're telling me naklitim are considered kavi'i, so then let them be like kinoifiyos, which means let them be invalid, even if it's less than 10 tefachim. So the Gemara says, no, it's relative. Lagabi kinoifiyos loy kavi'i. Lagabi kilo, yes, kavi'i. Okay, so that is the second version of Shmuel. And now we will learn another Amoida that argues with Shmuel. Darash Rabba Bar Rafuna. Muter Lishan Bekilo. But yesterday the last year we learned first version of Shmuel. Shmuel said that the sleeping in a kilo, which has 4 posts, which has a flat roof, is only allowed if it's under 10, comes along Rabba Barafuna, he darshaned in the public that you are allowed to sleep in a sukkah, in a kila type of canopy, even though it has a gag, even though it's a tall 10 tefachim. Now, doesn't that go against our Mishnah and Braisas? Yes, it does. But as we spoke out, or at least I hope we spoke out in the last year, that everything we're learning in Sukkah Daf Yud Aleph is based on the Tanoim, on the Chachamim that don't agree with Rabbi Yehuda. There is a Tana, Rabbi Yehuda, again, going back to Daf Beis, Rabbi Yehuda views the Sukkah as something more fixed. He wants it to be as similar to a fixed residence as possible. And again, it's all the fiyerach. So dafka, l'shitas Rabbi Yehuda, an oil is dafka not fixed. It's bottle, it's insignificant. So the reason why Rabba Barafuna was able to be so lenient when it comes to Akila was because he follows l'chayra Rabbi Yehuda. So Kaman ke Rabbi Yehuda, well, that must be according to Rabbi Yehuda. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? We can have this enough chaf aleph, lo yaso oil aray umevatel oil keva. And itnan, Rabbi Yehuda, against the Chachamim, lo yhagin hayinu lishain tachas amita b'fnei hazakenim. That we would sleep in the sukkah under the beds in the presence of the elders. The elders did not protest. Why did they not protest? Because it's a temporary. It's not a chatzitza. So since l'choura Rabba Bar Rafuna was simply paskening like Rebbe Yehuda, why did he have to give a drasha speaking about a kila? Why didn't he say we pasken like Rabbi Yehuda? Answers the Gemara, because that would not be enough. Because yeah, Rabbi Yehuda maybe would only say his din by a bed Why? Because since the lagaba asuya, the bed was built for people to sleep on it. You sleeping under a bed, the bed was not made to be an oil over you. That's mamish not significant. One might have thought dafka there is Rabbi Yehuda lenient. Avol kila the letoichoi asuya, it was built for you to sleep in the area in the kilo. Maybe even Rabbi Yehuda would hold that it is more problematic that the oil arai here could remove you from the tent. So Kamash Malan, yeah, Rabba Barafuna is only able to argue with Shmuel based on the Tana Rabbi Yehuda. His chiddush was understanding Pshat and Rabbi Yehuda. He was really telling the oilam is time that Rabbi Yehuda is because of one rule, the loyasi oil arem mevatel oil kava, and therefore loishna mita, which is the case of Rabbi Yehuda, and loishna kila, Rabbi Yehuda would hold that even though the kila has a flat roof and the kila is 10 tefachim tall, you are allowed to sleep in the kila. All right, starting the new Mishnah, these are the rules of schach. Rule number 1, and we just quoted this on Daf Tes. Says the Mishnah, Hidla, if you lifted on top of the walls that you built, first you put either geffen, grapevine, while it's still connected, or you put the last gort, or you put kisois, ivy. These are just examples of items that as they are still connected to the ground, they're long enough for you to be able to drag one end and to put it on top of your sukkah. But hold on, you didn't stop there. And then the sichech al gabo. Then you added valid schach on top of it. So you have this mixture of valid and invalid schach. Rule number 1 of our Mishnah is psula. Why is it psula? Says Rashi. We're going to call this rule number 1. She'ein misachechen b'mechubar. You have also kosher schach. So we're going to chazer soon in the Gemara, that which we learned on Daf Tes Amud Beis. And by the way, as we learned over there, that if there's going to be a majority of kosher schach and the non-kosher schach is mixed up in a way that it becomes indistinguishable, we will paskin the concept of bittul beroiv. And even if we need to use the non-kosher schach mechubar lakarka to create more shade and sunlight, it will be okay. But that's not the case of the Mishnah. Case of the Mishnah is that you have, let's say, majority is going to be the schach pasul, so then it's not good. Now, but if there's more kosher schach, then the Mishnah says, the non-kosher schach, again, so since and only when they are mixed up together, that means when you're in the sukkah, you look up, you don't know what part of the schach is still mechubar and what's not mechubar, then it's going to be good. Even though you need all of the schach to create more shade and sunlight. Number 2, or if you don't have more kosher schach than non-kosher schach, but after you creating your sukkah, now shekatzitzan, now you detached it from the ground. Now it's kosher. That's a whole different din. No, the Mishnah is giving you 2 different dinim. Din number 1 is kosher, bittul beroiv. Din number 2 is that you are able to correct this invalidation. Now on this kratzas on kesheda, we'll see in the Gemara that we quoted in the intro, the machlokas Rav and Shmuel. Is cutting it enough, or do you need to cut it and lift it and put it back down? Wait. Next. So all of this is based on the klal number 1, and that is, like Rashi says, she'ein mesachechen b'mechubar. Now, Zok the Mishnah, Zeh klal. It's a very interesting formulation. Zeh klal is going to go to the 2 other rules of schach. Kol shu mekabel tuma, anything that's susceptible to becoming tamei, it's halachically considered the keli, or it's not mekabel tuma. But the ein gidulei min haaretz, a stone, but it did not grow from the ground. B'medaik, not ein gidulei karka, ein gidulei min haaretz. I'm saying this for later, Rabbi Yechanan, if we'll have time today and the beginning of tomorrow. So then, Zok the Mishnah, ein misachechen boy, but chol davar she'eino mekabel tuma in its current state, and the gidulei min haaretz, Now, we are not discounting the first rule in the Mishnah. And it's not mechubar, then mesachechin boy. Has to be detached, has to be incapable of becoming tamei, and it must be something that grew from the soil. These are the three rules by Schach. That's it. Says the Gemara. Yosef Rav Yosef, Kamed Rav Huna, and the Yosef V'Ka'amar. Guys, don't forget that Rav Yosef, as we keep on learning, after his illness, which also made him blind, there was a certain amount of memory that he lost. Generally, it was Abaye that would come and remind Rabbi Yosef that which he taught. But we find throughout the Gemara that sometimes Rabbi Yosef made a statement that it was after he forgot. Sometimes the memory wasn't yet perfected. So he said that in the case of the Mishnah, where the Mishnah, not where you had the bittul beroiv heter, but where you detached it, you made a tikkun, you corrected the invalidation. When it says oy shekatus han kisheira, says Rav Yosef, on that says Rav tzorich linaneya. Hold on, not so quick, guys. The word linaneya means to shake. Shaking doesn't mean to shake. Shaking means you have to lift it. You know what you need to do? You need to lift it and put it back down. And that, again, these are the words. The Torah says Chag Hasukah is tasa, and Chazal darshan tasa v'loy min ha'osui, which means you shall make it and not use that which was already made. Not use that which was already made. If when it was made, it was invalid for a reason, and you fixed it, but now it's already made. It has to be kosher while you are constructing the sukkah. And it sounds like Rav is saying that we apply tasav eloim and ha'asui. So really, it's not enough for you simply to go and detach it. You have to also be minaneya it. Now people ask, so what's the chiddush of the Mishnah? If you're minaneya it, of course it's going to be kosher. Sfasema says, no, there's still a huge chiddush. Because the case of the Mishnah was that you also had kosher schach. So the Mishnah's chiddush, if this is what Rav said, is that you only have to shake the grapevines that you now detached. The other branches that when you put them were already detached, even though they were not creating a kosher sukkah, those do not need to be ninaneyad. So there's still a chiddush here. But Rav Yosef's memory now was that Rav subscribes and applies the tasav eloim and ha'asui here in our case. And he was challenged. Amalei Rav Huna, no, Shmuel is the one that said it. Now, initially, Rav Yosef understood that what Rav Huna, see, that the people were very sensitive to Rav Yosef. No one wanted to shame him. It wasn't his fault. He forgot. In other words, Rav Huna didn't tell him, Rav didn't say it. Rav Huna told him, Shmuel said it. Rav Yosef understood that okay, Rav said it and Shmuel said it. So what's your comment? So Hadrinu Rav Yosef la'ape, Rav Yosef got upset, and the way they expressed their upsetness was by turning their face around. And Amar lei, what atu mi kaminu lach lo yamar Shmuel? Did I say Shmuel didn't say it? Like, what are you adding? Amar Rav, Amar Shmuel. So now Rav Huna had no bereira. He needed to very respectfully tell Rav Yosef that I think you forgot. What I meant it to tell you was what you said, and Amoida said it, but it wasn't Rav. The Shmuel Amora. Shmuel is the one that says that we apply tasav in v'loim in ha'asui. Detaching is not called making, and you have to make it when it's kosher. Shmuel says that, but v'loy Rav. You know why? Because the Rav achshurei machshar. Everyone subscribes to tasav eloim and ha'asui. Elamai, Rav says that when you detach the grapevine or the gourd or the ivy, detaching it is called making it. So you're making it. So you don't have to lift it and put it back down. You don't have to be menanei it. So now we know, and indeed, azoidah. So there's a machlokes here between Rav and Shmuel. Now, just like you have this machlokes by Sukah, exactly the same is benegeya making tzitzis. Same thing. So says the Gemara, that when he put chelis, which means when he put tzitzis, on the cloak of his wife in shebeisei. So when he put tzitzis on his wife's garments, before we go on, the woman have to wear tzitzis or not? So Rashi writes over here that Rav Amram Chasida subscribes to the opinion that you have to wear tzitzis even at night. If that's the case, then tzitzis is a mitzvahs asay shelo yazman gerama. He held that women are obligated in tzitzis. So he put tzitzis on his wife's garments. Now this is a very important statement. Like Rashi says, because if Rav Amram Chasida would have held the way we hold, and that is that tzitzis does not have to be worn on a ksus laila, however it's defined, machlokes Rasham the Rambam, and therefore it's a mitzvah asay shehazman gerama, unlike almost all other positive commandments that are time bound, that if women want, they can opt, like they hear the shofar, like they sit in the sukkah, they can shake the lulav. When it comes to tzitzis, there is an issue of a garb of a man. We're not allowed to cross dress. Today we live in a time that you see the consequences of that. So if you would hold the way we hold, these are from the very few positive commandments that women should not be doing. Even though in Shulchan Aruch it says that if you see a woman now wearing tzitzis, you don't need to protest against it. Unlike tefillin, that you have to make a macha, you have to protest against tefillin. And by the way, tefillin, it's also connected not only to get to silbash, cross-dressing, but by tefillin there's an issue of a gufnaki. A gufnaki doesn't only mean to vent ear. A gufnaki means that if a woman were to have her period during the tefillin, and it's not up to her to stop it, that would be a violation of gufnaki. Anyways, coming back over here. Good. So Rav Amram Chasida held that women have to wear tzitzis. So when he was putting on tchelis, here also, by the way, you see that in the times of the Amoraim, there's still a tchelis on his wife's garments. For some reason, to la'an v'loy pasak rashi chutim shalahem. Here we can use a picture. What we do nowadays is that in the hole on the sides, we have one hole or two holes. We really put in 4 strings that are separated, detached. And when they go through the hole, they fold over and the 4 becomes 8. That's the way we do it today. And one is what we call the shamish, one is longer, and we use that one both to knots and then to twine. What happens, just think about it in your head without a picture. If you have one very long string, one, and you fold it over, and you fold it over, and now it became 4, and then you stick it through the hole, and now it became 8. If you can see the picture, you will know that two ends will be, so to say, disconnected, the 2 ends, and they can be used for the shamish. It's mamish possible to make good tzitzis, but you don't have 8 strands. And the fixing it will only be to snip those curvatures that are still connected. Mamish, the same concept of when you did that, when you cut them, now it's kosher, but you didn't construct it, you didn't make them kosher. So let's go over here. And also, and this is all backing up Shitas Rav Huna against Rabbi Yosef. Rav was the one that said that all you need to do is mefaskon. You only have to sever the tips and automatically they're kosher. You have to make tzitzis. Making it means it has to be kosher while you're making it. Yes, cutting the tips is called making it. Alma, we see that pisikasan, the severing of the tips, is called its making. So similarly, Rav will be even more lenient than Shmuel. He'll hold kitzit sasan, that detaching the grapevine from the ground, that is called making it. So you are not violating the tasav Eloi min ha'asui, and you don't need to be minaneya. Well, if you're making this correlation, so the Savar Shmuel, that we don't say pisikasan zui asiyasan when it comes to tzitzis, for Tani Shmuel himself in his yeshiva taught the following brayso. In the name of Rabbi Chiyam, Hitel l'shnei karanis bevas achas. Here you have another case of tzitzis. Here it's even more. Again, if you have a picture, it's helpful, but you have, again, only one strand. Not only did you not cut it into the 4, but the very long strand, and you put it through 2 corners at the same time. If you see a picture, it's worth 1,000 words, but you are able to begin making tzitzis not only by not having the 8 strands detached, but there was tzitzis going through 2 edges. And here also, And after you put it through the two corners, only then pasak rashi chotum shalahem. Shmuel said it's kosher. Now, what's the case of the Braisa? Is the case that you actually making of the tzitzis means that you're winding it and knotting it. The Havamina was that even if you wound it and knotted it while it was still all one strand, and then you severed the tips, that's a mamash against what we quoted in the name of Shmuel. Here it says it's kosher. And my love, not only did you put it through both kanonis, but also shekoishet, and only afterwards paisik. So answers the Gemara, no. The case of the Braisa that Shmuel taught Mishum Rabbi Chia was that you didn't knot them and twine them. You just put it through the two holes. That's not a problem. If paisik v'chakach kosher, so what's the chiddush to say that it's kosher? No, it's still a chiddush, says the Gemara, because mal the tema daf yud aleph amid beis that bo'inon konof b'sha'as psil, that you require a single corner while you're threading it, and here you threaded it together in two corners. Maybe that's a problem. So that's where Shmuel is saying it's okay, but the shita Shmuel is the machmer. Shmuel will hold that if you already began to knot it and to wrap the shamash around one, really, we learn in Shulchan Aruch, even the Alter Rebbe Paskins, just to know that if you see your tzitzis falling apart, you should fix it, but it's still kosher. As long as there is one knot and there was one twirling around, the shrine good to go. Once you did that, then it's too late just to sever the tips. According to Shmuel, you have to unwind it and redo it. Meisvei, now we're going to ask a question against Rav from a Braisa, and we will ultimately succeed in refuting Rav. Generally, we paskin like Rav and Shmuel be Surah. Not over here. Here we paskin like Shmuel, because he'll be refuted. Meisvei, it says in a Braisa, coming back to tzitzis, to law, and if one hung and knotted, it must be the tzitzis, while you still have a single strand, the original case. Psulin. Psulin means l'chayra, my love, psulim lo'olam, that even if now you snipped the tips, it remains puzzle. Tasav lemin also. V'tiyuf to the Rav. No, Rav says that doesn't mean that. Amalocha Rav, my psulin, it means psulin ache yipasku, but just severing it is called asiyasan, and it's fine. Shmuel Amar, no, that's not the meaning of the Braisa. The Braisa actually is telling you psulim lo'olam. Not only is that Shita Shmuel, says the Gemara, V'chein Amar Levi, psulim lo'olam. V'chein Amar Rav Masna, in the name of Shmuel, psulim lo'olam. Or another version was that it wasn't just a question that they were debating in the Beis HaMedrash, but it was b'didi hava uvda. That's very significant because, many times in the context of learning, you can say a certain halacha, but then when an actual case is brought to a Rav, sometimes he'll say something other. If during that's shilas and shuvas, if there was an actual shaila, and in halacha l'maisa, that's the psak din, it's even stronger. That b'didi hava uvda, that for some reason, whether it was Rav Masna or someone in his shul, in his community, that when they hung and knotted the tzitzis, for some reason they didn't sever the tips. It's very easy to do that. And then they wanted to know, what do you need to do? That v'asal akami demar Shmuel and v'amar li, my friends, forget about this. Severing the tips is not enough. You got to sever the tips. You got to unwind it, untwine it, and then do it again. Meisvei anochakasha against Rav, state in Abraisa to law on again. V'chakach pasak rashi chutim shalahem. Psulin, here it's clear. Here the Braisa writes clearly that when you hung them, you knotted them, no way, psulim lo'olam, just snipping the tips is not enough. Number one, void. Let's go back to the case of the Sukah, that we are making this correct correlation. Tanya gaba Sukah. When it says ta'aseh, and on that Chazal say ta'aseh, v'loy min ha'asui, you have to make the Sukkahs and not use that which was already made. Notice, when it was made, it was kosher, then it's good. But if when it was made, it wasn't kosher, and now you corrected it, but it's already made. Says in the Braisa, applying this to the case of our Mishnah, Mikan, Amru, based on this, Chazal say that if Hitla Aleh Sagefen, if you had the 4 walls, or the 3 walls, or the 2 walls, and the tefach, however you have the walls, the right height, the right width, the right length, but you don't have schach yet. Schach is done at the end. and you lifted geffen, grapevine, that's still attached, or you lifted the las, or you lifted kisan, and you spread those branches for your lidge, v'sich al gabon, and you spread it on top of the sukkah psula. And now the Gemara says, "Hey chidomi, what is the case of the Baraisa? Ilema that b'shaloi kitzatzon that you b'chlal did not sever it. Then why would the Baraisa associate this din to the tasav v'loy min ha'asoi? It's a much bigger problem. Ma'ira mishum tasav v'loy min ha'asoi. Tepukle, it's of course it's not kosher because it's michubarim ninu. Elot must be that what's the case of the Baraisa is that even though while you put it on top of your structure, it was attached. But now b'shikat satzan, and on this the Baraisa writes psula because tasav v'loy min ha'asoi. So shmamino deloy amrinon. We don't say that the act of detaching is called the act of making the sukkah. Kitzi sasan zuei asiyasan. We don't say that. So even by the sukkah v'tiyufta derav. So counters Rav. Listen, I get it from tzitzis. There's nothing for me to say. However, Amalach Rav, that your question regarding the sukkah, I can tell you, that where does the Braisa say there is an issue of tasav v'loy min ha'asoi only the shalfinu shalufe, that you did not really cut the vines off the ground, you only pull them out by your hand. Pulling them out means they're not fully detached. Pulling them out means they're still in appearance. It looks like it's still attached. It's resting against the tree. Since the loy minkara asiya didhu, since you can't see that it's detached, I also will be moida that there's a problem. Now, there's a big problem with this answer of Rav because that doesn't appear to be that which the Braisa is saying. Look inside the second Tosfos. Rav was trying to find for the Braisa, the Shalfinu Shalufe. So, Ksas Kasha. Guys, the Braisa writes Tasav v'loy min ha'asoi. Rav appears to be given a whole amount of science. You didn't do it with a knife. It doesn't look like it's detached. So, Tosfos has a Gevaldik understand. He's speaking like this. He says that you detached it enough where it's no longer getting nourishment from the ground, but the outside, a part of it is still attached. So it's still called tasav v'loy min ha'asoi because when does Rav say that detaching it is its making? That is when you really detached it. Since it was like partially detached, I know that the Gemara uses the words, it doesn't appear, but the way Tosfos understands it doesn't appear, meaning it's not called asiyasan and Rav's moida. However, back in the Gemara, Mikol Makim, nevertheless, the first part, the question, the refutation we had from tzitzis, to learn Machakach Pasuk is Taka Kasha L'Rav, and indeed Kasha. Sometimes we say Rav Tanahu Palik, but the kid said, as we will see, just from this, we do not paskin like Rav, we do paskin like Shmuel. It's very halacha l'maisa. If while the schach was placed on the sukkah, it was not kosher, now just because you took away the problem, it's not good enough. But you don't have to completely remove it. Here we go to what we learned in Amud Aleph, but Rabbi Yosef said in the name of Rav, in the name of Shmuel, clarifying that all you need to do is linaneya, shaking. Shaking means lifting and putting it back down with all of the details in Shulchan Aruch. How much do you have to lift? How tall do you have to lift? Which is the concept. That lifting and putting it back down will be what you need to do in halacha because we follow the shita of Shmuel. Now the Gemara says perhaps this argument, whether cutting represents making, l'cha'ura, that's a machlokes tanoim concerning a lulav. So guys, let me go take a step back. We're going to learn later in this Masechta. For hadassim to be considered a kosher hadas, aside of us identifying the right plant, that from one bud, 3 leaves come out, which is unique to hadassim, in nature, hadas has berries. If there are more berries than leaves, it's considered a spotted hadas. We'll learn about this later. It's not beautiful and it's invalid. But it's a problem that is rectifiable. And how do you do that? We're going to learn. You can pluck the berries off. At least enough that now you have more leaves than berries. Another din. B'kitzur, it's not again, just another din. We are not allowed to pluck the berries off on Yom Tov. we're not doing an act, God forbid, of biblical violation, because it's not attached to the ground. But on Yom Tov, you cannot be misaken keli. Okay, that's the din of the berries. This braisa begins by, okay, it's a Isur Gavra, it's a Isur Derabanan. I'm not allowed to pluck the berries off. What happens if someone plucked the berries off? What's going to be the din? So it says in the braisa, if someone violated this rabbinic rule and veliktan, and he plucked the berries off the hadas, and he rendered now the hadasim into a plant that has more leaves than berries. Nevertheless, says Rabbi Shimon ben Yehoid Tzadok, the hadas remains possible. However, now the Gemara wants to understand what's underlying this machlokes. So says the Gemara, Savrua always means, like Rashi writes over here, that the Chevra, the Yeshiva, like the Rabbanon, the Beit Midrasha, when they learned this Braisa, this was their initial approach. The Lakula Alma, everyone agrees that Lulav has to be Eged. It needs to be bind. Lulav requires binding, which is what we do today. The only of the four that's not bound with the Lulav is the Esrik that stands alone. But we know the Lulav is bound together with the Hadassim and the Aravos. Now, another premise, that binding the Lulav, if you have to, binding a Lulav is its making. So we learned about the making of the Sukah, the making of tzitzis. If you need to bind it, that's its making. So the reason why Rabbi Shimon ben Yehoid Tzadok says puzzle, it's not because you violated the rabbinic law. No, you did that, but it's on you. It's because it's already bound. When you did the binding, the hadas was not kosher. Mamish tasav aleimin asui. And v'yalfinan lulav misukah, even though you don't have the word making by a lulav. But since we make this comparison, this hekesh, and by sukkah it says the word taseh, so we have this rule as we are learning now, tasav aleimin asui. So based on this premise, they savru on the yeshiva, my love achir kol miflagi. The man, the machshir, chevre, that's the chachamim. Why? Savar, they hold amrinan, gabi, sukkah, kitzitzotzon, zuhi, asiyason. And that at least will be good l'rav. At least he has whom to lean on. So therefore, gabalul of nami amrinan, likitoson, the act of plucking the berries off, you shouldn't have done it on Yom, but you did it. You made it. You made it. So it was made now with a kosher hadas. However, Uman the apostle, which is the Tana Rabbi Shimon ben Yehoid Tzadok, he holds that lo yamrinan gabesuka kitzit sasan zuhi yasayasan. And therefore, since lulav is compared to the sukkah, the gabel lulav nami lo yamrinan likitasan zuhi yasayasan. If that will be the pshat, then we have a gevaldike machlokes tanoim. And by the way, that will be a help for Rav. Says the Gemara, no, loy the lokula alma lo yamrinan gabesuka. Indeed, everyone subscribes to that later, that which was later said by Shmuel. So what will be the argument? The male of lulav misukah, who says you compare lulav to sukkah? That's one way of understanding. Man the machshir, which is the shit of the chachamim, they hold that you learn sukkah, the alfinan lulav. Lo yalfinan lulav misukah. Yeah, sukkah. We don't say that kitzit sasan zuhi yasiyasan, but we don't have such a limit. It never says you have to bind it. There's no making by binding. So here, I don't care. Uman the apostle, which is Rabbi Shimon ben Yehoid Tzadok, he holds that we learn from Sukkah. Yalfina lulav misukah, or v'iba yisayim. I'll tell you more. Isfira landa lulav tzarech eged. If there is a din that you have to bind a lulav, then taka everyone the kol amalei pligi that we would make this hekesh between lulav and Sukkah. However, the machlokes will be mar savar tzarech eged. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehoid Tzadok, Umar Savar, the Chachamim hold, you don't have to do eged, you don't have to bind it. So who cares if while you bound it, it was invalid? Who cares? Now it's valid. Ube plukta, and indeed that we know that's a machlokes tanoim. Do you have to bind the lulav? Ube plukta the hari tanoi, the Tanya, the Tanakama of this brisa says lulav bein agud, bein she'ena agud is kosher. You have to take all the four species. But they don't need to be bound together. Rabbi Yehuda Oymed, only agud kosher, the first white line, the she'ena agud pasol. My time at Rabbi Yehuda, because yalef lekicha. Interesting. Where do we have the word lekicha? We have this, guys, when we left Mitzrayim, it wasn't only to apply the blood on the mezuzahs and the mashkef. We also know that it wasn't just the blood of the Korban Pesach, it was the Dam Pesach and Dam Milah, but we're focusing on not what was applied, but how was it applied. It was applied, the Torah writes, take a agudas ezoiv, a bundle. Ezoiv is a certain type of plant. In English, it's called hyssop or hyssop. Agudas ezoiv. And here it says, ulakachtem, right? Ksiv hasam, ulakachem agudas ezoiv. It says here regarding the arba minim, ulakachtem lochem, bayoim harishon, that's in Parshas Emoy. So that's the comparison. Malahalon, the Torah writes clearly, the word lakachtem is aguda, afkan, ba'aguda. However, the Rabbanan hold, lakicha layalfinon. Oh, right. Hyssop, we got it, weiter. 4 lines in the wide line. Says the Gemara, hold on. Now that we quoted this machlokes, we discovered this machlokes Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, I got a problem now. Because now, kaman oz lo hadatanya. When it says in a Braisa, lulav, there is a mitzvah to bind it. But if you didn't bind it, it's kosher. Who's this Tanach? Who's this author? I mean, either you have to or you don't need to. If the author would be Rabbi Yehuda, who does have the limud ulakachtem kilayogdei amai kosher. So it must be the Rabbanan. But why is it a mitzvah? They don't have. We just said that the Rabbanan lekicha lo yalfinon, says the Gemara, the Braisa, the Chachamim. Lo ilam Rabbanani. There is no, we don't make this comparison between lekicha and lekicha. Why do the Chachamim hold that lechatchila it's a mitzvah to bind the lulav with the hadas and the arava? It's a separate din because it says zekeli ve'anvehu. And the Chachamim teach this, that he's snoel lefan of the mitzvahs. Beautify yourself in front of God when you do mitzvahs. Why do we learn in Hasidus, my friends? What's the definition of beauty? Why is the Tiferes beauty? Because you take 2 things that are not like each other, and you create harmony between them. So the beauty of the lulav is dafke when you don't keep them separate. You take different items, which is the lulav, which is the hadas, and the araba, binding different things together creates beauty. That's the zakelev yanveyu. We have another few minutes. Let's go a little bit further. Then the Mishnah, after the Mishnah taught us the first rule, that you can't have attached leaves for schach, cannot be mechubar. Then the Mishnah taught us the other 2 rules. Zahaklal, number 1, kol davar shemekabel tuma is not kosher schach, and number 2, that whose growth, right, was not from the ground. Or in the positive, you need to have schach that giduloi min haaretz. It needs to be something that grew from the ground. And we want to know for the last one, where do we know these 2 dinim from? Both of the dinim. And by the way, when it comes to the first din that it can't be mechubar, so already Rashi in the Mishnah will call daf yud beis. We're going to get to that also next daf. But we're focusing now on the last 2. Begins the Gemara. Bino hani mili, omar eish lakish, omar kro. It's amazing how we're going over here. That it says in Bereshis, the aid, someone should mute themselves. It says the aid, yala min haaretz, that a mist will rise from the ground, and really you have to go through the hemshech. The pasuk writes, and v'hishka es kol pnei ha'adama. V'hishka es kol pnei ha'adama. In other words, clouds rise from the ground. Gedulim in haaretz. They originate from the earth, based on the premise, my friends, that a Sukah is to remind us the clouds of glory. So they have to be like the clouds of glory. A cloud is not makabel tuma, and we're going to consider a cloud something that gidulay min haaretz. Where do we see that in the scripture? Because a cloud comes from the mist, and the eid yala min haaretz. Ma eid davar she'eino makabel tuma, and the gidulay min haaretz. So the sukkah that's coming as a reminder of those clouds, of the clouds that we had in the midbar, af sukkah davar she'eino makabel tuma, and the gidulay min haaretz. Amazing, beautiful. Only problem is, who says that the whole schach is to remind us the Anan Yaakov, that's subject to Amachloikas Tanoim. Here we go. That Anan Yaakov hoyu. That when it says that with Lamanu Shafti as Bnei Yisrael Bohoitzi Oisam, what is that referring to? To Takanon. El Lamando Amar, that no, Sukah is Mamish Osulahem, that we had actual physical booths. And the Sukkah is to remind us of those booths. Ma'ikala Meimar, where do we have this Machlekes de Tanya? When it says in Parshas Emoid, Kiba Sukah is Boy Shafti as Bnei Yisrael, that I, God Almighty, caused the Bnei Yisrael to dwell in Sukkah. What does that refer to? Anane HaKavod Hoyu. Who says this? Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Guys, it's important to look at the side. And here he quotes the Toidas Kohanim that actually has a whole different version. Who said what? It's very important that because the Tur opens up the dinim of Sukkah is quoting that the Sukkah is to remind us of the Anan Yaakov. According to our version, that it was Rabbi Eliezer that is the one that opines Anan Yaakov. As a rule, we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer because Shamutihi. But that's why it's good to remember that actually, according to the Toidas Kohanim, that Shitas Rab Shimon. We follow Rab Shimon here. However, Rabbi Akiva Omer, especially Rab Shimon, Rabbi Eliezer. But let's go back in our version. So Rabbi Eliezer says Anan Yaakov. Rabbi Akiva says Sukah is mamish asul lahem. So the Gemara concludes the question. Ha nichal Rabbi Eliezer el Rabbi Akiva ba'ikal meimar. We got a problem. Oh, so I know we'll stop over here and we're going to begin because the whole thing goes until the Mishnah. So we're going to have Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yechanan, and then we're going to have a Ravin Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Again, we're looking for the source for the last two dinim of the Mishnah that schach both cannot be Mekabel Tuma, nor it does need to be something that Gedulim in Haaretz. We know immediately where do we get it from. To be continued.
Okay.
Have a nice day.